We are continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, the Chot Tefillin, in Siman Lamed Chet, and today we're starting Seif Vav, which is to be found on regular prints of Mishnah Berurah Shulchan Aruch on Daf Samech Vav Amud Aleph, and very appropriately we're going to be speaking about putting on Tefillin on Tisha B'Av. Says Maran Shulchan Aruch, but Tisha B'Av Chayavin b'Tefillin. We are chayav to put on tefillin on Tisha B'Av, even though that is a communal day of Avelut, and we mentioned an Avel, maybe the first day, is considered a serious level of Avelut to the degree that he is patur from tefillin. It's famously said in the name of one of the Soloveitchik families that the Avelut of Churban is set up in such way that it mimics the rules of Avelut of a real mourner. And it comes up level as we get closer to Tisha B'Av, starting from Shiva Asar Tammuz. We start some of them, like the Avel in Yud Bet Chodesh would keep, and then it comes closer to the Chodesh Av, and it becomes closer and more severe, like a Avelut of Shloshim, and then it becomes the week off, becomes like the Avelut of Shiva, and perhaps the Tisha B'Av itself, it becomes like a mamash, like the first day of Avelut. Again, there are questions to be asked on that and so on, but the pattern certainly holds true that it becomes more and more stringent as we get closer. But nevertheless, even on the day of Tisha B'Av, says Marash Charuch, you're hayav to put on tefillin, and the Mishnah Berurah writes to that, in regards to the halachot of tefillin, Tisha B'Av is not more stringent than the rest of the days of Avelut, and therefore you put on tefillin. Now we all know that the minhag of many Sephardi countries and the Ashkenazim has been that they do not put on tefillin in the morning until the evening time when the Avelut has subsided to some extent, and they do it for Tfilat Mincha. And the reason being, because as we mentioned before, by an Avel, it says that they are me'ulal be'efer, they are in dust and they're in dirt and they're besides themselves. So therefore it's not proper for them to put pe'er, to put the tefillin that's called a crown, a glory in the place of efer. Now by the Avelut of Yerushalayim, it says, Latet la'avele Sion pe'er tachat efer. The Hashem is going to give Avele Sion, the people who mourn for Yerushalayim, is going to give them a crown, a pe'er, a glory, tachat efer. Instead of the efer, the ashes that they put on the makom of tefillin, which again is the reason of the minhag. Some have that Sudam of Seket, they put ashes on the makom of the tefillin to establish this minhag, but nevertheless, you see from there that by Avelut of Yerushalayim, there's this concept of not having the pe'er as well. So hence, many communities, they have this minhag that they do not put on tefillin in the morning by shaharit. Now, the Mekubalim say, Kabbalah, perhaps you should put it, and Chacham Obadia says, minhag Yerushalayim has been to be putting tefillin on. And you see from this Maran over here even that there's no difference really between Tisha B'Av and others. Maran again later on discusses this as well. So therefore, many shuls you find in town here that they put on tefillin in the morning like a regular day. Others, you find them putting on at home tefillin in the morning, then coming to the shul, davening shacharit without tefillin, and then by mincha time, they put it again. Now, this was in our community back in Iran, in all the cities, basically the old minhag was that they did not put it during the morning, during the shacharit, and they put it all during mincha. In Shiraz, Harav Balanis, Shlita, he changed the minhag many years ago, about 2 decades ago. I wrote a letter to him asking 26 different questions that we had about the minhagim and about things that he had established and instituted back in Iran. And this was, of course, one of the questions. And the argument that was made was because he felt that many people will come to Shacharit and maybe not come to Mincha Arvit. And if you take away from them the mitzvah of tefillin, maybe that they're not going to put on tefillin. So this is something that, of course, I had a share of difficulty with, because since when we find that we change minhagim based on personal heshbonot that we have, B, and majorly because the way I recall, the community was there present by mincha way more than they were by shacharit. It was something that was a whole production. The shuls in Iran, it's a different story by itself. They had the minhag of every, even half decent shul, they had kaparot done on Tish B'Av afternoon. The larger shuls, they had 3 calves or cows that they would shecht, and they would check it right there and cut it to pieces and put it in what was the equivalent of Ziploc bags back then. And they actually would give it to Anim. The reason, one of the main reasons that they did this was to support the people who didn't have food to eat, as an act of tzedakah for people to get. Again, this is talking about the generation that was very different than the affluent time that we live in. Yeah, I didn't know that. They do it, they still do it. Okay, so that was the minhag. And I mean, there was no open seat left in the shul. Every single, it looked like almost like a ne'ilah by Yom Kippurim. Everyone came for mincha, unless you were not feeling well. That was a different story. But again, that is the reason that you find the discrepancy of the minhagim started from the Yotzei Shiraz, people who grew up and followed the psak of Harav Baroness Shlita. That's the reason. But the old minhag prior to that, about 40 years ago and before, was unanimously all the cities basically had this minhag of not putting it. Now, many, because of the psakim of Chacham Obadia, have changed that minhag, and you find many shuls that they put on tefillin in the morning, not because of what I just mentioned to you, but just simply because they follow Chacham Obadia's psakim and they changed everything based on that. Now, in the vacuum, we would say, well, we have a minhagim, our own minhagim have to be kept in a proper way, because again, like any community that has proper minhagim, our community also has had minhagei halacha that has to be kept, even though that we're here now finding ourselves outside our original place, outside our community, but we have a Persian community that is very strong and has their own moreh horaot, and they have communities of batei midrash, batei knesset, and all of the facilities that a infrastructures that a community halachically needs. Again, Mishnah Berurah speaks about this elsewhere. We're talking about the minhagim in Siman Taf Samechet and Taf Tzadi Vav and so on. What you exactly need for a name of a halachic community that would survive and keep its minhagim, that becomes a discussion for a minhagim shiur. Not every Sephardi motzah would keep their halachot over here. For instance, you have people from Georgia here. Now, they don't have a community of Georgians. They would be halachically batel, nullified to the majority of the Sephardic people in Los Angeles, which would be the Persians, right? So therefore, they would have to follow all of the chumrot of the Persian community, and they would be allowed also to follow the kulot, the leniencies of the Persian community. And that goes for every Sephardi background that don't have their own community stronghold over here, whether it be the Turkish families or from Turkish background or Iraqis and so on. Again, at some point, the Iraqis did have, but now they're more scattered among the other ones. So that's a serious halachic inquiry that has to be asked for every individual, for themselves and their families. But nevertheless, that's one of the reasons that you find even those who are normally loyal and bound to the minhagim, you find their shuls putting on tefillin in the morning is because of the combination of the fact that Chacham Obadia paskins like that, and also al pi Kabbalah, it should be the proper way would be to daven shacharit based on the tikkunim that this does. It would be proper to daven shacharit with talit and tefillin. So therefore, you have communities who follow the Kabbalistic psakim that they do that as well. So you'll see it on the things. Yeah, so says Maran in Sif Zayin, Chatan, I was afraid you're going to ask that. Chatan v'shusha binav, v'chol b'nei chuppah, pturim mishum the shchiach shechrut v'kalud rosh. Chatan and his immediate circle of friends that are with him, v'kol b'nei chuppah, and all of the people who called b'nei chuppah, they're patur mishum the shchiach shechrut v'kalud rosh. In that moment that they are doing chuppah, even though that the chuppah used to be during the day, right, not at night, so they did it like an early afternoon type of thing. And we said that in the time of Chazal, they put on tefillin the whole day, and Maran holds that the ikar mitzvah of tefillin also is the entire day. But when it comes to the Suda, that people are drinking and there's a lot of simcha, of wedding and so on, if it's type of a Suda that you would expect to have kalud rosh, lightheadedness, some loosening up by intake of alcoholic beverages and so on, intoxication would actually give a ptur for tefillin. So therefore, they do not put on tefillin. To which the Mishnah Berurah writes, "Bnei chuppah" means davka b'makom chuppah. It's only at the place of chuppah itself. The sham shchiach shechrut v'kalud rosh, because there they used to call this hijle, right? It's not the chuppah the way we have it. Chuppah the way we have it is a very formal scene that you go up the aisle, right? And you do the kiddushin on chuppah, and then you walk out, and the wedding is elsewhere, or they just clean off the chuppah and they go with the proceeding. But chuppah in the time of Chazal was something that they would call hijle. There would be not just the wedding there, but the Chatan and his immediate group of friends would hang out there the duration of the wedding, and they would be drinking and making him happy, and so on. And the nature of the way it was done was very much prone to intoxication, which really is not something that would be proper for them being wearing tefillin, and therefore, says Maran, in that case, it would be patur. But during the Suda, people were sitting by the tables. It's a regular party, basically, for them. People who are not part of the inner circle of the Chatan, and they're not in the Makom HaChuppah, that already would be a different story. Right. So besides that before the Chuppah they're putting it on, the Ramah writes in the Teshuvah, in Teshuvot Arma in Siman Kuf Lamed Bet, he says, the Ha'idna Shaf Chatan Chayav B'Kriyat Shema. Nowadays that we know, we don't follow the Mishnah in Masechet Brachot that Chatan is patur from Kriyat Shema. Nowadays, Chatan also says Kriyat Shema and Tefillah, as we're going to have it later on. We haven't gotten there yet. In Siman Ayin in Shulchan Aruch, we're going to be discussing this. They're automatically chayav b'tefillin as well. Ayin Sham. Ra'im b'Magen Avraham shemepakpek b'dino. ומסדר לפסוק השולחן ערוך דפטורים מתפילין בעת המשתה. Magen Avraham says no. In the time of the party, they are patur from tefillin, because this is not has got nothing to do with the reason for Kriyat Shema. The reason for Kriyat Shema is because the mind of Chatan is not there. He's busy with Tirdah mitzvah, as we mentioned in the Gemara. But here is not Tirdah mitzvah. They're just not appropriate for not saying Shema, but for having tefillin, because they could be intoxicated and act inappropriately for someone that's wearing the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on his body. So therefore, Magen Avraham disagrees with this assertion, and he holds that they would still be patur. And then he talks about tefillah, which we're going to be discussing it later on. The Vilna Gaon writes that against what seems to be from Rashi, that even for tefillah, a person should not be mekel, as we read in Bet Yosef. Maran writes it in Siman Resh Lamed Bet, which again, this is something we're going to be discussing at length when we discuss the halachot of the tefillah. But the minhag has been, within the Ashkenazim at least, like the Ramah, that Chatan and all of the people of the chuppah, they say Shema, and they put on tefillin, and they daven like a mensch, even in the first day, and throughout, of course, the 7 days of mishter, and we don't differentiate between them and other people. And again, Kaf HaChaim agrees with this assertion of the Ramah as well. He says the Chatan, we never find that they should not put on tefillin. He says just be careful from shichrut. Until the point that you put on tefillin, if you afterwards you want to take it off, that's a different story based on what we mentioned from Chacham Obadia, that the mitzvah of tefillin, you could establish the mitzvah with 1 minute even. So you put on tefillin, you say Shema, you daven like a mensch, then you could take it off and engage yourself more in the actual party of the Chatan, even though that it would involve intoxication, but nevertheless, beforehand, says the Kaf HaChaim, be careful. So long as you are holding the tefillin on you, you should be more careful in that, and Be'ezrat Hashem will continue the halachot in the days to come.